It is live now, officially.
She's clicking on it. The crowd is listening to me have this conversation. She's on. Okay, bye. Hooray! All right, perfect way to start. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kim Blackwell. I am the Managing Artistic Director here at Fourth Line Theatre, and welcome to the first of our 2024 Artist Talks. I'm so thrilled to be here in competition with Alison Lawrence. Alison is the playwright of Skins Peach Fuzz, the Farmerettes, which is based on the source material Onion Skins and Peach Fuzz, Memories of Ontario Farmerettes by Bonnie Sitter. Hi Bonnie, you're on now, and Shirleyan English. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I'm just excited that you're here. So you have a connection to the Bethany Pontypool area. Would you call yourself Bethany or Pontypool?
Bethany, that's what we always said. When I got off the train before the train got canceled, it would always be at Pontypool. It's Bethany, and I realized.
I know. I saw your bag.
Showed my bag today, and I realized. You see, the Manvers Historical Society.
Oh.
My mother was a founding member.
Right.
And they moved the post office. They took that's how it started. Was they found the post office was, Canada Post was moving to those little boxy buildings, and they were going to destroy this beautiful post office. And somebody had been using it. Somebody bought it and was using it going to use it as a chicken coop. And my mother said, that can't happen. And so she found out there was a grant, and they got a grant to start the Manvers Historical Society, and they saved the post office. And we drove through Bethany today, and the post office is still there.
Wow.
And your mom doesn't live in the area anymore, but she is just about to turn
97.
97, yeah. So tell me, the family is from this area, you were born here, but you didn't spend a lot of time here. Tell me about...
I wasn't born here. My parents moved here when I was about 12, 13. They bought a place. We were close to Bethany. We always talked about it as being Bethany. It was actually in the hamlet of Fleetwood, and which is just off of Highway 35. Our rural route number was out of Janetville. So I was there off and on all through my teenage years, and I started working in theater actually in Lindsay at the Kawartha Summer Theater, run by Dennis Sweeting back in the day, and he gave me my first job when I was 15 years old. I did the laundry and I cleaned the dressing rooms, and I sort of slowly worked my way on stage, and that was I worked there every summer all the way through theater school, and then he gave me my equity card when I started working. When I graduated from theater school, became professional, he gave me my equity card, and I met my now ex-husband, the father of my child, doing a show at Kawartha.
Which show were you doing at Kawartha when you met Michael?
Was that a terrible place?
If you wrote it and you're watching online, it's terrible in context. Okay.
I can't remember. I can't remember who wrote it, but it was. We used to do weekly rep. It was 9 shows in 9 weeks, and so they filled a lot of plays. And Dennis was always looking for new plays. And sometimes they worked, and sometimes they didn't. And I always remember this: that this guy came into rehearsals, and he came a little bit late, and he walked on stage, and his name in the play was Michael. His name was actually Michael, and he walked on stage in a white suit and turned to the audience and said, "Hi, I'm Michael, and I'm an angel." And it became a thing in my family. It's like, are you going up with the angel guy? Anyway, yeah.
So where did you go to high school then? Sometimes in Lindsay, but you were also, like, your family was living in other places because of your dad's political career.
Yeah, my dad was the member of parliament for the area. He was in Joe Clark's government.
Finance minister?
He was the Solicitor General and the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs. And he was, so Durham, Northumberland was his. We were right at the very tippy top of the riding, and they went down to Coburg. And my parents eventually moved to Coburg. My father had some heart trouble. My mom wanted him to be closer to a hospital. And they moved to Coburg, and they were there until the end of my dad's life. And then my mom lived there until 10 years ago. And then she moved into Toronto because both my brother and I lived there. And she wanted to be closer to us. Yeah,
So when you were 15 and you were doing the laundry, and I'm going to ask you if they were allowing 15-year-olds to use the vodka spray on clothes at that time.
No, there was a laundromat right behind the theater, and so I did rubbing alcohol, but I didn't do vodka spray. Okay. I remember doing that on a children's tour, though. I had a bodice that needed spraying.
I was talking to somebody about vodka spray the other day. They use it to spritz on clothes that can't be washed regularly in the theater because the vodka takes the smell, any body smell. But yeah, it's pretty popular to walk into a wardrobe anywhere in this country and see a bottle of Alberta, like a Mickey of Alberta vodka. Is this, I think, still probably the cheapest vodka?
Yeah, probably.
So before you were 15, did you have the theater bug?
Yes.
How? Where? Why?
My parents took me to my parents were huge theater fans. When my parents grew up quite poor in Toronto, Depression, and my mom she went to Eastern High School of Commerce and was a secretary. Yeah, and she was a secretary, and my dad decided he wanted to go to university, first in his family to go to university, and then he decided he wanted to go to law school. And his parents said, "You've lived with us for university. We can't afford law school." And so he was up in the Arctic surveying for the summer, and he wrote my mom and said, "I guess we should get married." And she worked him through law school. And then after that, they went to in 1954. She saved everything they had, and they bought one-way tickets on the Cunard line, and they went to England, and they lived in England, and she worked as a secretary, temp, and he worked as a substitute teacher, because there were no men left in England in '54. There were no young men, so anybody from anywhere in the Commonwealth with a university education could teach. And so he was a substitute teacher, and they would work until they had enough money, and then they would go and travel, and they would come back and work until they had enough money and go and travel. And they did that for like a year and a half. And when they were there, they saw everything. My mom kept a diary which she transcribed, and they gave to all of us. And they went to see everything, standing room tickets, and my mother was obsessed with Laurence Olivier and Vivian Leigh, and she stalked them. She knew where they lived. She would go and hang out
legit stalking.
Yeah, she was. But they went and saw them plays, and I just found recently. I have my mom just moved into a retirement residence, and I took her filing cabinet, and I've been cleaning out the files and stuff. And I found a bunch of playbills, and the last thing they did before they got on the boat back was they drove their little car with their trunks tied to the top of it to Stratford, and they saw the Scottish play with Olivier and Vivian Leigh, and they've got and I have the program now. I stuck it into my Shakespeare. Yeah, they did.
So it comes from that.
So they just loved it, and they took me to see theater. And when I was 3.5 years old, they took me to see a touring production of Oliver at the what was that? The O'Keefe Center then, and because there were kids in it, and I just loved it. And my mom suddenly realized that Nancy was going to die, and I was in love with Nancy, and I'm sitting there watching it, and so halfway through the second act, she said, "You need to go to the bathroom." And I said, "No, I don't." She said, "Yes, you do." And she's dragging me up the aisle, and I'm like, what's going on behind me?
This is why I've never watched Old Yeller, because I know I won't be able to handle it, so I've never watched it.
Yeah. No, I
like
totally,
that.
yeah.
I'm with your mom on that one.
But anyway, so I just went, well, there are kids on stage. That's what I want to do. And so I think I always just did that. I used to, and now this makes sense because eventually I started writing rather than just acting. And I used to make up stories for me and my best friend, and we would reenact. Like we used to reenact The Sound of Music in her bedroom. And she was always I had her. She was always the ingenue, the pretty one, and I played everything else with our stuff.
We had similar. I was saying something the other day. I was never an ingenue. I was playing like Aunt Lizzie. At 13, the old crone.
Yeah. So that's what I did. I was playing all of those parts all the way through. Yeah.
Was there ever any doubt it was going to be theater forever for you?
No.
Never. Like in all of these,
No.
few decades that it's been.
No, and sometimes now that I'm the age I am, I think, what was I thinking? But my parents, I was very fortunate because my mother didn't get to do necessarily what she wanted to do. She loved theater, she loved design, she was a really terrific artist, and she also loved politics. So she was probably, public school at grade 6 or grade 7, I guess. The teachers came to her parents and said, this girl is really bright, she should go to a collegiate, she should have a career. And they said, she can't. She has to start helping to pay the rent, so she has to go to commercial school, she has to go and we have to know she has a job.
Right.
So I think for her it was really important that we got to do whatever we wanted to do. And I know that they told me years later that when I went off to Lindsay at 15 with my hair in pigtails and big round glasses, and I had a pair of railroad engineer overalls that I bought at the general store in Bethany, actually. And that, I wore that all summer with work boots, and I was in the shop and I was cleaning the place and everything, and I loved it. And my mom said that when I left for that summer, she said to Dad, if she survives this, then we know that she really wants to do this. And I came back, and unfortunately it was sort of game over for high school because I came back and I had no interest in school anymore. I just wanted to be in theater.
Did you finish high school?
I did.
Okay. And where did you go to university? I couldn't see it in any.
I went to George Brown College.
Oh,
I was in
okay.
the third year of the acting program at George Brown.
It was on
King Street.
Yeah.
We were the first class that went to that building. We were in this little tiny building in Toronto, King and River Street. And
that's where our loft was, King in Parliament, like that.
Oh,
We had
wow.
one there, right by that old George Brown.
it was, and it's produced some amazing people, but the program outgrew this building. When I was there were 20 kids in the first year and 20 kids in second year. So there were 40 people tops at any time. And it was great. It was exactly what I wanted and needed at the time.
So when you went to theater school, you already had your equity card through Dennis, or did I
No, I got it later.
Later, summer.
Yeah,
So,
I apprenticed was an apprentice actor in between year 1 and year 2. And then after second year, I had a job in Toronto with a thing called the Young Company of Ontario, which they used to do every year. They would sort of pick people from, you auditioned if you were graduating from theater school, and they had this little company. They worked in multiple different theaters around the university. We were in the Glenmore Studio Theater, and it was a magical summer. It was great. And then the next year I went back to Dennis, and he offered me my equity card.
And so in that period, what was sort of your first kind of major principal role? Do you remember?
Yeah, I did.
Thank God. I have other questions.
No, my first summer, this first summer out of school when I was at the Young Company of Ontario, so there were 10 of us, and we'd all graduated from various programs, and a mutual friend of ours, Andy Warren, who was from York, and Allegra Fulton, who is quite well-known Toronto actor now. She'd gone same schools that I've gone to, and all the she's was in it, and a wonderful woman named Jane Dixon, who's a really dear friend of mine, is now a line producer for children's television. There are all of these, John Comerford is a casting director now, and Jonathan Whitaker, who's still an actor, like this great group of young actors from all these different programs, and a young designer who was, I think still is, for many years was the head of design at the Shaw Festival, Bill Schmuck, and the stage manager. And they threw us into this thing. We all worked this summer. We did 3 plays. And at the end of the summer, we were all auditioning for the same things, because anything that needed a young person, they all went, well, there's 10 young actors there. And we all auditioned for Nurse Jane Goes to Hawaii, the first production of that, which is this play that is, at the time, was the most produced play in Canada. It's a comedy, a farce by Alan Stratton, who's a wonderful Canadian writer, and it was his first play, and it was produced at the Old Phoenix Theatre, and there's an ingenue part. There's a young woman who's a reporter, and she's trying to get the dirt on this woman, and I got that part, and it was this huge success, and it ran, like, it opened we rehearsed in September, it opened in October, it was supposed to run for 4 weeks, and it ran until Christmas, because it kept getting held over. And I thought, oh, I guess this is the way it works. Never had that again.
So, because I want to jump forward to your writing, but I am curious, so you're kind of going along, you have a successful career. Is there a moment, though, where it changes?
Oh, yeah. Because I looked so young. I had this very brown face and long blonde hair, and I just looked incredibly young. And I got married. I played young girls. I always played young women, and I got married, and I was thinking about having a child, and I was approaching 30, and I called my agent and said, I can't play young kids anymore. And it's a really hard transition for young women. It's a very hard transition into that sort of next thing, and it certainly was at the time.
And less roles.
Far fewer.
I was talking, when I directed Her Too, I directed 12 women in Her Too, like a few years ago. And the women were talking to the Globe and Mail about how you hit 40 and men hit 40, and the whole Shakespearean canon opens up. Women hit 40 and there's nothing, because all the women are dead in Shakespeare, right? And for all the men to then have reasons to act.
Because one of the first plays I wrote about the first 3 women, a couple of the first women on the Restoration stage, and I did a lot of research for that, and and of course, one of the things that never occurs to you, but Shakespeare wrote for men, and there weren't men. There were young boy actors who could play all those young women, but there weren't. Like Cleopatra was probably never performed in public in Shakespeare's lifetime. The theory is that he wrote it for I can't remember his name, but there was a duke who was a patron of the theater, who was a really fabulous drag performer, and he wrote it for him. And it was probably performed in private, but it probably because there weren't, when boys' voices broke, they played the guys, but there weren't a lot of men who could play those parts.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So I want to ask, because I want to jump on Bitter Girls, but I'm so curious, were you always a writer? Like, are you a journaler? Have you okay, and you always a journal somewhere?
I always wrote, like in high school when they were trying to keep me interested, I took a lot of English courses and creative writing courses, and I always wrote, but I always said I couldn't write dialogue, and I wrote journals, I wrote short stories, I sort of thought maybe someday I could write a novel. I wrote bad poetry. But when I got older, I was working, I've worked often with a in Eastern Ontario, the Upper Canada Playhouse.
Mooresburg?
In Mooresburg,
Right.
yeah. And the artistic director at the time was a guy named Marshall Button, who has a very successful solo show that he has a character that he plays called Lucien. And he used to do Lucien on the CC all the time and do all these solo shows for him. And Marshall was directing me, and it was a four-hander, and the other three people in the show had all written plays at various points. And he said, you should write something. Because I'd just had my daughter, I was in my young 30s, and there weren't as many parts, and I wanted to be at home more, and he said, you should write something. And I said, I can't write dialogue. And he said, write a monologue. That's what I do, write a monologue. Just write something for yourself. So I did, and that's how I started writing. I wrote a one-woman show that I took to the Edmonton Fringe, and then I did it at a small festival in Toronto that was all work by women, and that was how I got my start writing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then tell me, because I think, would we be safe to say, we are going to get on to Onion Skins, we're moving that way, I can't tell you. Would it be safe to say that your biggest commercial success is Bitter Girls?
Probably, yes.
To this day.
Yeah.
So tell us about it to start with, and then tell us how it came to be.
I was doing a play that I was doing a huge Greek play, this huge production, and there was a guy in it that I liked well enough, but after the show one night, everybody was out for a drink, and his girlfriend was sitting next to him, and I started talking to her, and I thought, I like her a lot, and we started chatting, and she and I ended up being interviewed on CIUT or something, one of the, like either the Ryerson or the U of T radio station. Yeah, and it was like women artists and how you juggle doing all the things that you do, and it was me and this woman, Mary Frances Moore. And at the end of it, they said, do you have anything that you're writing right now that you're working on that, that you might want to read? And I had this little monologue that I'd written about, by this point I was on my own with my daughter, and I'd written this little monologue about trying to explain to my daughter how I could love, like how I could tell her that mommy and daddy weren't in love anymore, and trying to explain to a 3-year-old that I would always love them. And because I remember she asked me, she said, she stopped and get teary. We were walking to daycare, and she stopped and turned to me and said, Mommy, why did you make Daddy leave? And I went, oh,
That's the narrative, isn't it?
okay. And I'm thinking on my feet and trying to explain. When I got home that night, I thought, what did I say? Did I say the right things? And so I started like writing this thing, and so that became this little monologue. And I read it, and then they cut to a commercial, and Mary Frances leaned over to me and said, my friend Annabelle and I are going to start getting together every Tuesday morning and writing together, and I think you should come with us. And so we started meeting. So it's Mary Frances Moore and Annabelle Fitzsimmons and me, and we met every Tuesday at a coffee shop, and we brought in writing, and just didn't know what it was, but it ended up, we were going to write something huge, deep, meaningful, and we kept writing about relationships. And the 3 of us, Annabelle was serial dating, Mary Frances was living with this guy, and knew it was not going to work out, and I was on my own with my 3-year-old, well, this then a little bit older daughter, and we just started writing about our lives, and then there was a call at Buddies in Bad Times, which is the gay theatre in Toronto, they have a festival every year called the Rhubarb Festival, 20-minute work. And so we cobbled together 20 minutes of it, and we called one of the other guys from that show that I met, Mary Frances, doing her then boyfriend. Yeah. Okay. It's Michael Waller. He now is a director and teacher at Newfoundland. And Michael came, and we put this thing together, and we had 20 minutes worth, and we each decided one thing that we could wear. We wanted to look good, and so we wanted to wear black evening gowns and high heels. And so no matter all the terrible things that happened to us and all of we humiliated ourselves on stage. We did terrible things. We just but everything we did, we're going to look good. And so that's what, and it was this success. And then it just kept growing, and we produced it by ourselves, the play. We added a boy, the bitter boy, who was all of he left all of us. He dumped all of us for everything. He was the guy for everything. And the play got longer, and we produced it at Second City, and then it was this huge hit. And then we produced it again at Second City, and it was a huge hit. And then we found a little stage over top of the pilot.
I was going to say, it was at the pilot.
At the pilot time, we ran it for 5 months at the pilot.
Yeah. In that little space upstairs.
On our own, yeah. And we did it there, and then the stairs up at the pilot had holes in the walls, and so they didn't fix them, and so we didn't want our audience coming into this place with holes. So we made imaginary chapter titles for books, for a book of Bitter Girl, like as a self-help guide. And we made them we blew them up in big pages, and we stuck them on the wall to hide the holes. And then a literary agent came to sell it. And she called us and said, "Have you ever thought of writing a book?" And we said, "Yes, we have." And so we wrote a book.
It did very well.
It did very well.
Were you on the Today Show, or I made that up?
We were on the Today Show.
On NBC.
Yes, NBC.
Yes.
And with J-Lo and Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart, fresh out of jail. She was on the comeback trail. She was in the makeup chair next to me. I was like, oh my God.
Officially have made it now, right?
Oh, and then of course nothing happened. We came back to Toronto, and we kept doing what we were doing, and we all kept working on our own stuff. And then we had always thought, we'd always talked to Michael, our director, about turning it into a musical, because we'd had girl group music in all of the scene changes and everything. The whole thing sort of scored to girl group music. So we started working on it. It was a long process, but we did. It's a jukebox musical, all with girl group music, and it premiered at the Shirleyan Festival, and then it played pretty well every regional theater in the country. It's never played Toronto, but it did all the regional theaters across the country, and then went back to the Shirleyan Festival again. Wow. And then last year, and then wasn't done for several years, and then last year we had a production at Drayton and at Thousand Islands in Gallipoli. Oh wow!
Didn't it go to England?
It did. We did the play in England. We did
Right.
the play in England, and we also did the play in New York. We went down and did a backers audition for a producer, and we ended up doing it at the theater. The 4 of us at this theater where they were doing puppetry of the penis.
Yes,
and
I know that theater.
well, if you're on the stage, none of the performers in puppetry of the penis are actual performers. They just have this special skill. They do things with their penis. And so
they can, like balloon animals.
yeah, like
that's
balloon
the easiest
animals.
way to think
That's
of what
the
they
whole.
do.
It's like you sell it to. I together, like, you know, stag
Spigots.
things like that. Anyway, so we're standing on the stage, and the whole rundown of the play is written on the walls on the inside of the proscenium. So while we're doing the show, we keep looking up and going, what? That's because they couldn't.
With drawings?
Stick figures.
Stick figures, yeah.
Anyway, so that's Bittergirl.
And so that was a major thing for a lot of years and still continues to be.
Yeah, it keeps coming back, and yeah, it's so interesting, and it's also hugely done, the play, by high schools.
It is.
Yes, we get it when they used to have the Sears Drama Festival.
Yeah.
Every year we would have productions in the Sears Drama Festival, and I just loved it. They'd always ask us if they could cut out the naughtier bits, and we said yes. But the girls just loved it because they're talking about breakups. They know what that is. Yeah, and heartache. Yeah. And female friendship. That's the main thing of it is these three women through the whole thing. They find themselves by finding that they're friends, and that's my friendship with Mary Frances.
And you're friends to this day?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm actually, Mary Frances is now running, she's the Artistic Director of Theatre Aquarius in Hamilton, and Annabelle and I have a date next Friday to go and see her opening.
Oh yeah, mine and Jeff are going to that. What is this? Tom Wilson's. Yeah. Just talking to mine about that.
There you go.
So I want to ask you if you've ever adapted a work prior to this.
No. And it's been fascinating.
Okay.
It's been so great.
So we had talked for a while about doing something at Fourth
Yes.
Line. Remember, you had, I feel like some theatre
Jam.
groups reserved the jam, the playwright jam.
I still have that. I still have that idea. But Mary Frances and I were working on that, and then she doesn't have time now. So that is still something that I think about a lot, because my mother always makes jam without thinking about it, or used to make jam without thinking about it, and she always thought pectin was cheating. She would make strawberry jam just like, while she was doing something else, and I used pectin, but not for strawberry jam, for every other jam. But anyway, I lived in an apartment for a long time with my friend Marilyn Norrie and Charlotte Dean, who are both good country girls, and we would all joke about how on the hottest day of the year we wanted to make jam or pie, because that's what you did. It was usually the hottest day of the year. So I always had this vision about a group of women getting together to make jam, because.
So that didn't end up happening, but one of my donors at Fourth Line had been in Stratford and had been at an Airbnb, and this book was sitting on the table at the Airbnb.
Onion Skins and Peach Fuzz, Memories of Ontario Farmerettes.
Exactly, and they sent it to me I must have got it in September of 19, and then reached out to you about whether you would want to. I first reached out to Bonnie and Shirleyan to make sure we could have this together. Went and met with them, and that was all moving forward, and then reached out to you about it. So I'm curious, you got the book, thought it was maybe interesting,
yes.
and how did you go about making it a mess like that?
Well, look at this. I mean, this is what this is. Because, but really, here's I thought, I've done plays, as I said, that have involved research before, but I'd never done an adaptation. And one of the interesting things for me, I'm very aware that Bonnie's watching this, because one of the things is it's a beautiful book. It's memories. It's people's photographs, their letters, essays, interviews that people that Bonnie has done, and Shirleyan, and they've talked to people about their experiences. And throughout the book, people kept saying, it was the best summer of my life. It was the best summer of my life. And
which is great.
Which is fantastic.
And on the other hand,
it's difficult to theatricalize.
Where's the messiness? Where's the problem?
And so reading it, when you start reading it and really reading the stories, there is messiness. There are things that, and there are things that also that you can imagine that people you know, I went to camp. I went to theater school. I spent, you know, chunks of time with groups of women. And you know the sorts of things that can come up and the situations that can come up. And also, they were doing all of this because I've chosen to, the Farmerettes happened during the war and also went after the war.
43 to 52?
52, yeah.
Right, yeah.
And so they were, think about what they were dealing with. These young women probably had relatives who were away at war. They certainly were very aware of it. They were, the girls who were during the war had been born during the Depression. Life was not just simple. So once you start sort of looking at that, looking at the time around it, and also reading this, there were all sorts of things that come up in the book there. They were working in the fields sometimes next to POWs. They were working in the fields next to Japanese Canadian families who had been sent inland. They were working in the fields next to Indigenous families who were working as farm labor. There were all sorts of things that these girls from all over the place were suddenly in. They were living and working and quite, they were looked after, they were in camps, they were, things, but they were living a much different life from what they were living in.
Yeah, they came from Northern Ontario,
Yeah.
the cities. None of them, we can safely say, that we've encountered ever worked on a farm before they got to the
Yes.
place.
Yeah.
So really quite foreign, and to start with that back-breaking work of, is it asparagus first?
Asparagus.
Which
yeah.
literally, I think somebody says somewhere, and you probably have it in the play, is that over the period of the day, the asparagus grows like so
Oh, yeah.
fast that you cut it in the morning and it's ready to be eaten in the
Yeah.
afternoon.
And
Wow.
it's back-breaking, like asparagus, because they would be planting new fields of asparagus for a couple of, years down the road, and then go and start, work and planting asparagus. I mean, now I always think, you go past the fields where asparagus is being harvested, and they're on those machines where they're low and they're being driven, and so they're reaching like this, which is one thing. But these girls were crawling on their hands and knees in the dirt with a cloth bag and cutting it off with a knife, and you had to cut it at the right length. Some of the farmers gave them rulers. It was backbreaking, and one of the girls in the book talks about just standing there in a field and going, okay, what do I do? And the farmer goes, well, weed it. Yeah. What do you mean? Like, what do I do?
Is that the same story where she pulled out plants instead of the weeds?
Yeah.
I think you have to be a little bit more specific when they're this big, which is a weed.
I honestly.
And the sunburns, and that it wasn't great food everywhere. Some places they loved it because it was not great food, and their ration books were taken from them to pay for their food for the summer,
Yes.
right? During
Yeah.
the war times. And how much were they making a day or week generally?
Not like everybody mentions the pay, but it's like 25 cents.
Yeah, and then they were paying their room and board out
Yes.
of that.
And some girls were ending up in the hole.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if they didn't pick enough or didn't
Yeah.
pick enough, or they got sick, or it was a rainy.
Yeah, rainy season, but then some farms, it depended if you were living on a farm, where you were actually, part of that particular farm rather than at a camp, you sometimes were working, they would find other things for you to do if it was raining. You would be, helping around the house or doing laundry. And there were also things that were scary, we found out, I got off on a tangent because when I started on this,
Yes.
I thought, because one of the things that Fourth
Fortnite
Line
does so
does
beautifully.
is they have these gatherings called reminiscences.
Yeah.
And
But then what happened in March of 2020?
what
We were gonna
happened
do
in March of
reminiscences
2020? Yeah, well,
The world shut down.
the world shut down. And so this book became my lifeline, and it sent me off into the research that I could do online. And Bonnie Sitter kept sending me things that would send me off in different directions. I had a correspondence with a gentleman whose father, his family, I guess, so his father's family, were Japanese Canadian and had been moved inland and ended up working on a farm, and he talked to me at length about their experiences and what that was like, and so just things that would come to me would I was able to connect with people.
But we didn't have that authentic voice thing until last year.
Last year,
So
finally.
3 years late, we did a reminiscence in Waterloo, right? Kitchener Library.
Yeah.
150 people in the basement of the Kitchener Library.
Yeah. And
16 farmerettes.
Wow.
Ranging age from 92 to 100.
Wow.
Came. The 99-year-old drove herself and wore a costume. Yeah, we got the photo of that.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah, we'll show it to people afterwards. So it was so then you had sort of gotten as far as you can, but there's something really wonderful about the reminiscence piece in Fourth Line in terms of the authentic voice, right?
Yes.
So when you went back in, you had a draft written. We were working on a draft. We workshopped it weirdly the day after the reminiscence, because again, we weren't workshopping plays for 3 years.
Yeah.
So you were the second workshop back, I think, that we
It
had
was
done.
so weird because I'd spent 3 years with this play and with these girls, in relative isolation. It really saved me during the pandemic. I worked on this and a couple of other things sort of back and forth, but it was these girls, that I was with, and then to suddenly, have the reminiscence, and then the next day go in and have actual young women sitting there reading these parts, because what I decided to do, sitting by myself in my office, was I thought I have to fictionalize this, and I have to have some women that you care about, that you are going to follow, and so I sort of figured out 6-ish women, young women, and then that sort of morphed and changed. Some of the girls, it's going to be 6 actresses, 6 young women, and they play everybody. And so there are 2 that you follow through both acts, and then the others change. They play somebody in one act and somebody else, and
As well as sundry
and as well
farmers
they play the farmers. They play the beloved. There's a boy who's somebody gets a crush on. There's that sort of thing.
Crappy little kid.
Yes.
We're boy, we're kid.
And so they get to play all those, because when I was a young actor, you didn't get asked to play those parts very often. You didn't get to play, all of them.
And I think that's why partly why we wanted to do it. We were co-developing it with Blythe, and of course a smaller cast show would be advantageous for them to produce it as well.
Yeah.
But for us, we could have done it, character per actor.
Yeah, and at one point I thought, great, well, somebody can play all of these people. And I still think, that could be done sometime. But it just worked out that I kind of liked the idea of these 6 young women getting to play everybody.
Absolutely, and some of them are, a couple of them are in theatre school who was cast and very young in their early part of their career, to get to dig in and play young, old, men, women. It's going to be an exciting show at Fourth Line, just the 6. We haven't done anything like that probably since like the Real McCoy maybe.
Okay,
David French's that summer. It'll be in that kind of ilk. It's exciting, the transformational work. It's great. When we had the reminiscence and you met with the women, one thing I will say is that you got so much of it right. Because when they started to tell their stories on that Saturday morning in Kitchener, so much of that was in the play already. Was there anything that you walked away from it and added after that?
There was stuff that I added, and I'm trying to think now. I think mostly it was, I kept going, remember who they were. Do you know what I mean? Like that I can write it, but suddenly I was sort of like, oh, that's very much, that's what I was thinking about. And I was trying to remember the actual words. I was writing down the actual phrases that they used to describe things. Because I thought it's so much more specific than something that you can imagine. Imagine the situation, but when you actually hear from people in their own voice, it really sort of flavored the next draft, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
It was interesting because they all said it was the best summer of their life at the Reminiscence.
Oh.
I think 90% of them met their future husbands on farm. Would that be accurate? And some of them were married 76 years,
Yeah.
like
Oh,
long
wow.
periods of time. And then there was this other piece they weren't even aware, and we'll just lightly touch on it. That it was I will just say it like this: it was dangerous to hitchhike by yourself.
Mhm.
You always did 2s or 3s, but not as many as 5 because you wouldn't get picked up. But they didn't know they were telling sort of dangerous stories about some of the experiences. I don't think they were aware. Would you agree?
No, they tend to, because, well, I think from a great distance, I think the same thing. When I think back on my teenage years and the things that I did, and I go, oh, I laugh about that. And now you think, oh, well, no. And that's some of the stories they were telling, and they were laughing about them, and we were listening like, oh, wow.
The lens is different.
The lens is very different.
Yeah.
And we found that was something that changed at one point in one of the drafts. I wrote something. I remember writing something and then going, I think we all talked about it, and it was just a little bit too. To an audience today, it's like, oh, that's a little. So I sort of I looked at it and thought about it and thought, how do they? What do they say in this situation? What can make it apparent that they're okay, that the girls are okay,
Right.
in this? Yes. Yeah.
And what was the first thing you wrote of the play? Do you remember what? Like, did you start at the beginning of what is the beginning of the play? Is that how you started?
I did, but it's shifted around a lot in the order of scenes. I've moved things around quite a bit. One of the things that you encouraged me to do that I have never really done before is write an outline. Write an outline, and I found that really useful for this particular piece because I wanted to figure out how I was going to structure it. And so I sort of had a framework, which I think is actually a pile of stuff in there. I have it tacked on my bulletin board beside my desk for ages. And trying to work in what the crops were that they were working on and how they get better at it as they go. That, asparagus, they all talked about, how hard asparagus was and how difficult it was, and the planting was all really hard. And then as they get hardier and better at it, they develop as what they're harvesting, or what they're planting, what they're harvesting, what they're pruning goes along, and how and it's also slightly different in slightly different regions. So we talked about that, having 2 acts that happen in 2 different camps that were in 2 different places. And I remember you saying to me that it would be really interesting to put them in 2 different places. So it might not be entirely the way most girls' experience were as farmerettes, but I've set the 2 acts in 2 different years, 42 and 45, and in 2 different places, so that they are literally harvesting different things. There's something new for them to learn in a different place. And I don't think that many girls have that experience, but I thought
Artistic license.
there is an artistic license, but also it can widen what it is that where they are and what they're doing. Yeah.
Let me ask you about that in terms of dramaturgy, because you've written for a long time, a lot. What kind of dramaturgy works for you, or do you like, or you can just say everything that I did, and that would be a really good answer to the question.
I did like everything.
No, I did.
No, but I did, because it was interesting, because because what I find is that different people, opening yourself up to working, because theater is very collaborative, and when you're writing, it is you're sitting by yourself in a room, and then you walk into a rehearsal hall or a workshop or something, and you're working with all sorts of other people. There's all sorts of different opinions and ideas, and the first time I had a dramaturg, I didn't know how to work with him. I didn't know what worked and what didn't, and he was great with me. Sort of held my hand, and it was really, really useful. But I also learned that ultimately the play is mine. You know, that I can say no at a certain point. That I do want things to happen in a certain way, but that if you can open yourself up to what somebody else from the outside is looking at it and saying, maybe you should try this, maybe you should try that, that it's always helpful, because there's always going to be things that you haven't thought of. And for this particular play, just because it was kind of Tetris, trying to figure out how to structure it and how to, and then I sort of settled on, okay, so it's going to be six actors, so how can I make that work and have the most number of people? So what years is it going to be in? And then I just chose 42 and 45 because of what was happening in the war and how that outside world informs the 42. The end of the summer of 42 was Dieppe, which everybody thought in the beginning was a great victory, and it wasn't. And then in 45, just before they arrived, was VE Day, but the end of the summer is VJ Day. So the war was ending. So what they've been through. So okay, so now I've made that decision, so how does that inform what happens? And then if you've got these 6 girls, which are the ones you're going to follow all the way through, and who's going to get along with who, and who's not, and why does that happen, and what is it? So it really helped to have your voice encouraging me to do that structure, so that I sort of have an outline to sort of figure out, okay, that's going to work. Now that's not going to work, so I'm going to take that and I'm going to put that there. That was really helpful, and also to hear other people saying that I understand or that I don't understand, or it's okay if you do that. Like you can move to 2 different camps. You can do this. That was very.
And you had 2 sort of different sort of external voices. You had somebody up live, and then you had me.
Yes.
And that it's interesting to think about having 2 external sort of dramaturgs, literary managers looking at the piece.
Yeah, and because the play is going to be done in both places, it's going to be fourth line. Fourth line is first, and fourth line is so specific. What it is, like I've seen plays at fourth line. I've been coming to fourth line for years, and I know what that is.
What that reality is.
Yeah, and live, it's going to be on the outdoor stage, but it's very different. It's a stage. It is a stage, and it will move indoors at the end of the run. So it's much more traditional.
Yeah.
And so the 2 places have very different demands, and it's going to be really interesting to see how 2 different directors approach that.
Yeah, I'm excited. For both directors, Autumn and then
Yeah.
Severn's directing, right?
Severn's
Yeah.
directing.
So it's great. And I think it's exciting. I mean, we were just talking about this beforehand. When does a play get 2 productions in the same summer, all about women's stories, women's characters? Fourth one's getting it first, so that's great. They come together, and then it's going to live in August. Well, it's August, yeah. But I think what a gift in a way. Like, there was talk at one point we might do the same production. We started here and then go there. But I'm just so excited for you, for audiences, and for the Farmerettes to get 2 distinct productions in the same summer.
Yeah.
I just think it's a total blessing and gratitude around this.
Oh, I know. The Bev Cooper, who has written.
Who I'm
Jim
talking
Watts.
to next week.
Peter talking to
Yeah.
Same time, but at the Peterborough Theatre Guild,
Yeah.
2 o'clock next Sunday. But
Yep.
yes, continue.
But Bev and I have known each other for years, and we both started out as actors. We both used to, like, I was talking to her at the auditions, and I said, the first place I remember meeting you was at an audition for this show, and I remember it was this really weird show, and the character was in the bathtub, and she's like, I got that part.
Okay.
I'm never going to see her in it. But she and I were both saying, because she is, you know, she also has a play at the Blythe, but a different play. So she has 2 plays in 2 different places this year, and I have the one play in the 2 different places, and we were both like, this doesn't happen in Canadian theatre very often. We are so lucky.
Yeah, we're thrilled to be having Jim Watts' Girl Reporter as well,
It's
which
really
we've been
great.
developing, which is,
I
I
can't
was
wait to
looking
see
at,
that.
I was looking at film footage of the Spanish Civil War, because a large piece of the play takes place in Spain during the battle scenes, and I met with the costume designer the other day. She says, there's gonna need to be lots of blood. Yeah, no, I know.
Oh, I can't wait to see it.
I'm excited about both of them. I think they're great counterpoint to each other this summer for audiences. I wanted to ask you just sort of one last question, and we'll see if anybody else wants to ask anything. What do you have a particular time of day that you write, or any rituals around your writing, or a place you always write? You talk about my office. You are
I have an
my
office.
office person.
I have an office. I'm very lucky. My husband and I live in Toronto in a 3-bedroom house, and my daughter is now 33, so she doesn't live with us anymore. And so we have a guest room. It's the cat room now. The cat thinks it's hers, and I get that. Exactly, it's her bed. And I have an office in the back room, and last year, heaven, it was the last room to get anything done to it, and I finally last year renovated it and insulated it. So my feet don't get cold in the winter anymore. It's been great. I tend to get up in the morning and do everything else other than write. And I do things and I do things and I do things, and I find that my most serious writing is late afternoon into about, and then at about 6 o'clock I go, okay, I gotta get up, I gotta go.
So sort of 3:30 till 6 range?
Yeah, 2:30
2:30
to through, and that's when I tend to, it's like there's no more excuses. There's nothing else that can be done. There's nothing else that can, and that's.
Oprah's not on anymore, so that's.
I have my mother's thing. I find it really hard to have the TV on during the day. I can't watch TV during the day.
Your mother
Nighttime,
couldn't?
that's what I
Your
can.
mother couldn't?
No.
It was on in my house, so I have to have it on.
No, that's I
Because of all
radio.
the stories.
I have
soap operas.
I have CBC radio on all the time, and I'm sort of half listening to it all the time. But that's when I tend to write.
And silence, or do you have the CBC on
I
when
have
you're writing?
CBC on when I'm
Oh yeah, no, I
Mm.
have to have silence.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm just a baby writer, but. And so you're good at dialogue now.
I am.
From that early monologue.
I know, and it's really funny because I remember telling somebody, I wrote a play that got workshopped out in Newfoundland. There's a Newfoundland director, an artistic director, Donna Butt, who's a legend out there, and she was working on this play with me, and I said to her, well, you know, I always figured I wasn't very good. And she said, that's the thing you're best at. It's like, oh, hey.
Well, first of all, that sounds like a backhanded compliment. The implication is you're not good at the other things. I would fake smoke that and say, dig into that.
But it's true. I think I'm good at dialogue, and that's. I think that came partly from doing the monologues, but also then working on Bitter Girl. I think made a huge difference because working with 2 other people, you couldn't be precious about things. We would write scenes and we would pass them back and forth. We would change things up and stuff, and you couldn't be possessive or precious or anything, and that was a huge jump and learning curve. And that was great for me, really good for my discipline.
And what are you working on right now?
The other play that I was working on during the pandemic was very sad. It's a play about medical assistants in dying.
Oh my God, I'm writing a play.
Are you?
It's called The Death Dinner Party.
Well, I remember
Mine is comedy.
Well,
Mine's a dark comedy.
This was I wrote it, and I was involved with Studio 180 Theatre in Toronto. I did 2 in-development programs with them over 2 different years, and right before the pandemic, there were a couple of theatres who were very interested in it, and because of the nature of it was very current to what was happening with the legislation and everything at the time. And then the pandemic happened, and nobody wanted to go and see a play about medical assistance and dying. Everybody's theatre project got backed up several years, and so I sort of kept working on it, and so I'm kind of going, I think I'm going to completely overhaul it and go back to it. And I'm also working on a play, the one that was workshopped in Newfoundland, that is, it's about a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter. Where would I get that idea? And the granddaughter, the middle one, the 52-year-old, has come home to move her mother into retirement residence, and her mother doesn't want to go. And so it's the 3 generations packing up this, and it's called Packing Up.
Oh.
And I'm working on that.
And on your acting career, like you do act. First of all, I just want to say that The Thing Between Us,
Yes.
your play, it's one of my favorite plays I've ever
Oh.
read. I haven't seen it yet. I was on the Carol Bolt jury years ago and
That
shortlisted.
jury made me so happy because I wrote this play and I produced, no one would produce it, and I have a little company that when I can't get things produced, I produce them myself. And I produced it myself, and Mary Frances, my writing partner, was in it. And it did quite well, but it was very small. It was a small production, and it sort of disappeared. And I sent it in for this competition, the Playwrights Guild of Canada, and it was shortlisted for the Carol Bolt Award, which is a big deal for a playwright. And it didn't win, but the jury, everybody on the jury came up to me afterwards and were so amazing about it that it made me weep because you all saw it in a way that anyway, I love that play, and it's never been done. It's out there, and it's
So good.
It's a tiny little play.
It needs to be done. It's really wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much.
And so, but I want to talk about your acting because I don't know, maybe I was on Facebook and I saw, Alison's in this thing on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
And what's your character's name?
Oh, my character's name is Horeen.
WHOREN. Horeen.
And people would say, one of the directors that came in, because I was sort of a regular on this show.
Yes.
One of the directors came in and he started to say, and even I can't even say that. He said, I'm sorry. I said, it's okay, it's a plot point.
Yes, it is.
Because
So it's called The Lake.
It's called The Lake. And it was written by a friend of mine, Julian Doucette, who I met at the Banff Playwrights Lab. We were playwrights there together. And years later, cut to, he's become a very successful screenwriter and TV writer. And during the pandemic, he sold this show to Amazon. And he said, I want you to read for this part. It's weird.
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
Loved it.
Yeah.
Loved
It's
it.
wacky.
Yeah.
It's very wacky.
It kind of like, it's all those people who live on Georgian Bay and they go to the Algonquin Club kind of thing, right? That's the basic premise of it?
It's all these people who are in a community on the lake.
Yeah.
And I'm one of the people on the lake. And I just, it was this gift because we shot it during the pandemic. We shot 2 summers during the pandemic. And it's Julia Stiles who, is in all the
Step Up. She's Step Up.
Yes,
Yeah.
10 Things I Hate About You, which
Yes.
is just had an anniversary.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Ledger.
And then she was in all the Bourne movies. And she's just lovely. And Jordan Gavrays, who's a Canadian actor who was in Orphan Black, and does all of these. He's amazing.
But it's all that stuff about siblings and the fight for the cottage and You know, I always listen to Rita Celli every summer, guaranteed on the college show on CBC, when they have the lawyer about cottages and families, and the pain that people have about the family cottage when it comes to that time, when things must be split up and divided. But that's kind of the premise of it.
Exactly
and then it's absurd.
And
it's absurd.
And it's absurd. But it was so much fun. We shot it in North Bay, and we all went and stayed in a hotel together in North Bay, and these wonderful, lovely people, and we'd all go to these cottages and shoot every day, and it was I got to do that for 2 seasons.
Are we gonna have another season?
No, 2 seasons. I said 2.
The writer's strike killed it.
Oh.
Yeah, and they never announced it. And so finally, Jordan, who has a big fan base, went online and said, okay. He said just one too many people had come up to him and said, when is the next season? And he finally went, okay, I'm announcing this because nobody else is. There's not going to be another season. So we were very
Well, if you
sad.
get a chance to check it out, it's wacky.
We're all still on Facebook, email, text
Chain
together. Like everybody's birthdays, everybody's everything.
It's lovely. It's a fun
Yeah.
show. Is there anything else I haven't touched on with you? Or do you feel exhausted enough to like sleep? But then I'm like running out.
Going to our
gosh.
nieces on the way home to have dinner with the family. So.
But you've been so open. It's so wonderful. Thank you. But I want to
thank
see.
you.
Oh,
Yeah,
gosh,
everybody
amazing.
has
Any questions? What did I miss? What do you want to know? I always think of no. Oh no, there's a question.
When was the book written? Is the book still available?
Yes,
it would be fun
it is.
to read the book before going to the play.
Well, how do we get it?
I know that Bonnie, could you send me an email?
Yeah.
But I think it's on Amazon.
Yeah.
I think you can go online and get it, but it's called Onion, Skins, and Peach Fuzz, Memories of Ontario Farmerettes. And there is, you can find it online. And Bonnie goes around, and where I first, right before the pandemic, when you first talked to me about this, I got in touch with them, and they were doing a presentation at the library in St. Mary's, and they would go and do a presentation and then sell books. And they're still doing that around. Bonnie still does that.
She does a ton. I'm not seeing it on Amazon, but I'll find out. We'll let people know.
Yeah.
You can get the book. But yeah, but the great thing is Bonnie is amazing. They're working on a documentary film about the Farmerettes.
Yeah.
They're also going to be, there's Farmerette beer and Farmerette wine. Some of which might be available in some way at the farmer. Yes, we're trying, but yeah, when we arrived at the Kitchener Library that day, first of all, we did not think there'd be 150 people in there. It's like, I don't know, maybe, no, not Pontypool. I don't even know if there's ever been one as big and well attended in that way, but they had booths set up.
Yeah.
I was like, what is going on here? And it was the beer booth and the wine booth. And the other thing that was interesting about the book and the Farmerettes story is that some of the Farmerettes who have passed away, their families discovered something in a box. And had never known their mothers had done this thing. Oh, there were so many people who came out with that.
So last summer, when my mom was still in the apartment, my cousins from who now live in Vancouver came to visit. My cousins Leslie and Laura, and I've known them all my life. I'm very close to these cousins. And my Auntie Gladys, their mother, has passed away. And I'm sitting in my mom's living room with them, and they said, "What are you working on?" And I tell them I'm working on this play about the Farmerettes. And I always hesitate because people either go, "Oh, the Farmerettes," or they go, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And then I explain. And so I sort of hesitated, and my cousin Laura said, "Oh, Mom was a Farmerette." And I went, "What?" And she said, "Yeah, Gladys and her sister, they were Farmerettes. Best summer of their lives," they always say.
That should be the t-shirt, really.
Yeah.
Well, funny, Wayne Irving, who followed Fourth Lines Photography for 33 years, came out to shoot the advanced photography for the brochure, which is available. Tickets are on sale. And he had mentioned to his mom, he called his mom in Peterborough saying he was headed to Fourth Line to do this shoot last June. And she said, "I was a Farmerette."
Oh my
And I
Lord.
just never told him. I think people did a thing and then they just got on with their lives. And that was that, you know?
Yeah. My mom said she was she said, oh, I remember posters going up at school, and she said, I wanted to be a farmerette, but I was 15 and I was too young. And then the next summer, she had gotten a job in the Eaton's factory in downtown Toronto, and she needed to make better money than the farmerettes made. And she said, I always wanted to be a farmerette.
Because you got out of your grade 13 departmental exams?
You got out of any grade. If you
Any
qualified, you qualified to be a farmerette if your grades were over a certain amount. You had to keep your grades up to a certain amount, and then you didn't have to write your departmentals at the end of the year. So that was a shame. Yeah.
If you did 9 or 13 weeks or whatever.
13 weeks. You had to stick it out for 13 weeks, but nobody ever said, like, what happened if you went home and didn't do the 13 weeks? Like, what, did they make you go back and repeat a year?
Exactly. We never heard that. Other questions? Anything else? Yes.
Mine's kind of a double barrel. First of all, you met quite a number of these ladies.
Yes.
And you kind of touched on it. Did it give you a different perspective that you wanted to rewrite some things because of your conversations with them?
Yes, I think that I always imagined there's sort of a framing device to the play, and at the end we talked about, we kind of wanted to see them afterwards, and so I have a little bit of sort of what happened to them, afterwards, and that definitely informed that. And I really found listening to them. Severin said something to me about the dialogue that she said she said make sure that the vernacular is right, because you're signing. Yeah, the time period, and I think that really informed it, because some of the ladies were talking about things and talking about how they talked about things. Do you know what I mean? Like, even in their memories, that they would sort of fall back to it. So that really informed it. Yeah.
Okay, now the second part of that actually came from my sister. How did the being outdoors and not having the protection, cancer? Did that ever come up as part of the discussion?
But it's
Sunburns, though.
Yeah, the sunburns.
Yes,
Yeah, the skin burns where I was
Nobody's
wondering.
ever said that, but I know from my family, like my mom's got skin cancer from going to the Eaton's Girls Camp, like being out in the sun, and nobody,
Yeah, I had the same wonder, but there's quite a bit of it, how painful the sunburns were until they...
And pictures of them with, like, people talk about hats and things like that, but at the same time, what were they doing? They were putting Noxzema on it, which was still happening when I was a kid. Yeah, all of these pictures, like some of them, we're all told in their packing list that they were to bring hats, but very few, the number of them that are wearing hats.
Also, when we started to see the photos, I am surprised by how little clothing they wore. Because we have this idea of people at that time, old and tiny, barely any clothing.
When one of the girls said that, and I actually put that in the play, that when her daughters found their pictures, she couldn't believe how scantily dressed they were. Like, there's one there, and they're, like, she's wearing a halter top that looks like it's made out of kerchief. And they all rolled their pants up, like they'd start the day, and then they'd just roll up and roll up and roll, like they're wearing nothing.
Yeah.
It was too hot.
But they didn't have the same hole in the ozone layer back
True.
then, so
They didn't have
it wouldn't
that.
have been as extreme, but I just thought
Yeah.
there might have
Interesting
been
question.
the cancer
Yeah, no,
there.
I have thought about that, but nobody said that to me, but, like, there's this group of ladies, and they all.
They're all in their 90s, and so they're...
Yeah.
Oh, we got one here and then here, yes.
I just had a comment from Russell Sitter, who is watching the live stream. He said, the Farmerette wine is available at Shale Ridge Estate Winery in Thetford, Ontario, and it's tasty. But also wanted to mention that Bonnie will be at all of the shows at the theater for the 3 weeks of the run in July. And she's selling her books as well as some other things, farmerette things, at the farm before the show as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes, right here. And then
So,
here.
so you shared that like the conditions were, you know, difficult and the work was very hard and all that. But the consistent theme here is it was the best summer of their lives.
Yeah.
What did they say? Was it the camaraderie? Like what did they say made it the best summer
Freedom.
of their lives? Mm.
Freedom, and just, the camaraderie, yes, but it's funny because like a lot of them, they weren't necessarily people who, like it's not necessarily that they had, they were still friends with these people, but it's just like this period of their lives, you know, and to be in, for all of them, it seemed like it was the first time they'd been away from home, and also very proud of getting, like a lot of the girls in the interviews talk about, I got home and I was so strong, you know, like people couldn't believe how strong I was, and they were, yeah, they were really physically fit by the end of the summer, and they were all really proud, like, you know, I gained 12 pounds, and it was like, they
hitchhiked to the United States and they'd buy new underwear
Oh,
in
yeah.
Buffalo and Fort Erie, and they'd sometimes like leave their old underwear there.
Yeah.
They would wear it and they start having problems.
Festival, that's what we used to do. We'd go across
Yep.
Lewiston and
Yep.
switch clothes and leave our clothes in the garbage bin and then come back.
Minxes. Oh my gosh, I got a question here.
I just wondered what year the book was published in.
2019. It might have been 18, but yeah, I got it pretty quickly. It was sent to me pretty quickly after it had been published.
Yeah, and as I started to say, I went to St. Mary's and did, 2019. I went to St. Mary's to hear Bonnie and Shirleyan. I got a copy of the book, and I came home and we were planning a reminiscence in April of 2020. And
Boom.
I wrote a play that was at Theatre Orangeville that opened on the 13th of March,
Oh.
2020.
Yeah.
And I got a preview and I got opening night, and then it closed. So yeah. So then I started working on it.
Yes, another one here.
Years ago, I read a book about the English version. I think they were called The Land Girls.
Yeah, and there's a Netflix show about the Land Girls.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's quite people
Yeah.
would enjoy.
Yes.
The same thing, exactly.
Yeah. My cousin is a journalist and podcaster, and he does a lot of things with the Canadian War Museum. And he keeps referring. He said, "Your Land Girls play. It's not the Land Girls."
Lois?
Now that you're brilliant at dialogue, how do you write a dialogue? What is your kind of cadence of getting it out of your head and on page?
I think the thing is to figure out who the people are. Like you figure out the characters, and figure out what you want them to do, and eventually they just sort of start talking to each other. Like seriously, they will start talking to each other, and then it becomes pretty clear, you know, how each one will and how they do it. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to say, first of all, thank you again to Alison Lawrence.
Thank you.
So it is on sale. It runs July 1st to 20th. We have my artist talk with Bev Cooper next week at the Peterborough Theatre Guild at 2 o'clock on Sunday the 28th, so join us then. We've got brochures if you want to grab one if you haven't received it in the mail yet.
Mine arrived in the mail.
Thank you.
Ooh.
Thank you. Yeah, the system works. That was one system. And the only other thing is I'm directing a show at the Peterborough Theatre Guild that opens on May 3rd. Oh my God. Morris Panich's Girl in the Goldfish Bowl. Yeah, I'm having a good time. So if anybody wants to see something before the summer on Roger Street, it's a very fun comedy, and it's a play that I saw 22 years ago in Toronto at Tarragon Theatre and have never forgotten. You've been having a blast working on it. Did you see it?
I did see that connection, yeah.
That's great.
It's beautiful.
And the 16th of May, John Jarvis, who played the original father, and Christina Nickel, who played Iris, the young girl. They're both going to come, and we're going to do a Q&A afterwards, too.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so I'm really excited. So, yeah, lots going on, and we can't wait to see people in the summer. It's going
Yeah.
to come very quickly.
And tickets for that show are on sale through the Peterborough Theatre Guild.
Thanks.
So you got to call Fourth Line
Yeah.
and the Theatre Guild.